This talk is about making art on computers. So I've always considered the computer to be an artistic medium. I'm sure many of you have as well. That's pretty well accepted nowadays. But I think that we have to keep in mind that this is still a very young medium. And we're still a very long ways from understanding the true potential of this medium. To a large extent, we've been using this medium to emulate older media and to create art that's modeled after existing art forms. So, for example, we paint on the computer. And when we paint on the computer, we're creating the same form of thing as when we're painting on canvas, but now we have undo, and we have the hue slider. So the computer gives us a powerful new way of working, but it's not a new art form. It's still painting. And likewise, we can create animations on the computer, and we don't have to do what the old Disney guys did, drawing on transparencies 12 frames a second. We have timelines, we have tweening, we have these powerful new tools, but we're still creating animation. We already know what animation is. And likewise for music, for sculpting, for film editing, we're creating these things in here instead of their native media. This gives us a powerful new way of working, but they're not new art forms. They're old art forms created in new ways. So one thing that I like to think about is the possibility of new art forms that could only exist in the medium of the computer. And when I'm thinking about that, one of my primary inspirations is video games. So we can go all the way back to the beginning of video games. This is only about 40 years ago. The first commercially successful video game was Pong. And even that was kind of an emulation. It was simulating the physical activity of table tennis. But pretty soon after that, we got things like Pac-Man, or Donkey Kong, or Super Mario Brothers. These more abstract creations that didn't really have a precedent. Super Mario Brothers wasn't modeled on anything. You know, we called these things games, but they weren't derived from classical games like backgammon or chess. Super Mario Brothers was this creation that could only exist in the computer. It only made sense in the computer. You can't have Super Mario Brothers on paper or on TV. You can use paper or TV to refer to the aesthetics of the game, but the game itself taps into something that's deeply fundamental about the computer. So what is that? If we consider video games to be the first native art form in this medium, what is it about computers that enabled games? What does this art medium provide that no medium in the past had ever provided? And I believe that the answer to that is simulation. Digital characters can behave and respond. So in Pac-Man, that little ghost that's running through the maze, he's responding to where the walls in the maze are, he's responding to what the other ghosts are doing, and most of all, he's responding to what the human player is doing. And this sort of responsiveness is not something that we've ever had in a visual art medium before. You can draw a ghost with pencil and paper, but it's not going to chase you around the page. So I believe that behavior and responsiveness is the essence of the computer as an art medium. And what that means is that anytime we create art that doesn't have behavior, we're not living up to the potential of the medium. It's not native art. Now, there's two different types of behavior I'm going to talk about today. One is the simulated behavior of digital objects like that ghost, but people also have behavior. People also behave and respond. We can say that the ghost is alive in a simulated sense. A person is also alive in a conventional sense. And when a person is playing Pac-Man, those two living beings are responding to each other. Now, this talk is not about games, but it is about what sort of art is possible when both the art and the artist are alive. When the art and the artist are responding to each other and working together to create something beautiful. The three parts of this talk, there's three things that I want to show you. And in the first part, I'm going to draw a fish. So this is what Magritte called the treachery of images, right? This is not a fish, this is a picture of a fish. It's a visual representation of a fish. And if I was drawing this on paper, this would be a pretty good representation of a fish, right, as far as quickly sketched silhouettes go. If you opened up a book and you saw this printed on the page, you'd think, yeah, there's a picture of a fish in my book. It captures about as much fishiness as we can capture in the medium of paper. But this is not paper, this is a new medium, and in this medium, this is a terrible representation of fish. It's not like a fish at all. Fish are always moving. If you see a fish, he's probably swimming around or is waving his body back and forth, is waving his tail. A fish is always in motion. And so in a medium where we expect to see motion if there is motion, this does not resemble at all a real living fish. It's a pretty good picture of a dead fish. And if you want to draw a dead fish, Photoshop is a great tool, right? You can, because everything you draw in Photoshop is just going to lie there completely dead, completely static, not moving on the page, just like real dead things. But I didn't want to draw a dead fish, I want to draw a fish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a hinge down this part of the picture. And then over here on my control surface, that gives me a parameter that I can kind of swing around like that. And I'm going to hit the record button and swing the parameter around. And it's kind of like using the loop pedal on a guitar. I just kind of modify that parameter while holding down record, and now it's going to swing that tail around forever. And I'm going to put a pivot down the center of the fish so I can swim around this way. And I want to make him swim around, so I'm going to scale him down a bit so he has some room to maneuver. That's good. And I'm going to record a path for him to follow. And I'm going to use that pivot rotation to make him swing around at the edges. So what we have here is an animation of a fish. And this is just an ordinary animation. You could have created the same animation in Flash or After Effects or any tool. This is just a simple animation of fish. If this were TV, this would be a pretty good representation of a fish, right? If you flipped on the TV and you saw a few seconds of this, you'd think, oh yeah, there's a cartoon fish on TV. It captures about as much fishiness as we can capture in the medium of TV. But again, this is not TV, this is a new medium, and once again, in this medium, this is a terrible representation of a fish. It's not fish-like at all. And I'd like to show you what I mean by that. So I've never seen a fish completely ignore the bait like that, right? Fish are alive. They respond to things. If you throw a worm in the water, it's going to get excited and check it out, or he's going to get scared or run away. He's going to do something. He's not just going to keep swimming around in a circle, right? Now, I suppose you could play devil's advocate and say, maybe this is just a really smart fish, right? He sees the hook, and he's like, I'm not even going anywhere near that. I'm just going to keep swimming. Very smart fish. So we can test out that hypothesis. This is not a smart fish. So we've gone from a dead fish to a dumb fish. And if you want to draw a dumb fish, Flash and After Effects are great tools. You can keyframe up that fish and you'll tell him exactly where to be at every point in time, and he'll be exactly there at exactly that point in time, regardless of what's going on around him. Completely oblivious to his surroundings. That's what we call animation. So the essence of this medium is that objects we create in this medium can behave and respond. So with that in mind, I'd like to show you a different representation of a fish. So the fish that I have here, same guy that I drew, but now I can lead him around with my finger. So he has a number of different behaviors, which I've taught him, which I have over here on the under my control surface on the left. And this one, I'm kind of making him swim around, and he can swim over here to the left or the right. And so between the simulated behavior of this character and my behavior as a performer, together we can respond to things. So let's take a look. So my fish, let me bring it back. My fish in this case is living in a simulation. And what that means is that 60 times a second, the computer asks the fish, what do you want to do? And the fish can look around at the other objects in the scene, he can look at what my hand is doing, and he can decide to move a little bit or turn a little bit or do whatever he wants. And he does that 60 times a second. And the way that he knows what to do is that I've taught him a number of different behaviors. So that first behavior that we're starting off the scene with, I called swim. And so I'm using it here, and he's just kind of moving towards my finger. But I'm not dragging him around. It's not like one-to-one like dragging an icon on the desktop. He's kind of using my finger as a target, but this is the beginning of the scene. He's kind of bored. There's not much going on, and so he's moving to my finger, but he's not moving very eagerly. He's kind of very sluggish. It kind of feels like I'm tugging him through the water. But then later on in the scene, the hook drops down, and now he's excited, right? So I switched to a behavior called dart, where he's following my finger, but in a very different way. You can see that he's much faster. He's tilting his body, stretching out his body as he's moving. He has a little bounce to him, so if I put my finger down, he kind of overshoots my finger a little bit and comes back to show like how excited and dynamic he is in this moment. So between these different behaviors, whether he's like kind of swimming around or darting around, and how I'm moving my hand, together we can really convey a mood. Now, not all of these behaviors are for moving the fish around. So here's one behavior that I had called surprise, where I can make him do things like that. And the important thing here is that surprise isn't just a trigger. I don't just hit the surprise button and he plays back some canned surprise animation. The surprise behavior is the fish's cue to interpret the motion of my hand in a particular way. So I give him the surprise behavior, and then as I move my finger back, he kind of tilts, he squashes, his tail wags faster. And so with that performance control, I can get everything from a simple whoa to a ah, right? Or everywhere in between. So this becomes a performance control. It becomes something where you can fluently express a range of motions through the movement of your hand. So what you're seeing here is kind of the interplay between two living, behaving beings. There's the fish behaving through simulation, there's me behaving through performance, And there's this wonderful kind of symbiosis with the two of us working together to put on a show. And the simulation and the performance are really complementary. So when I was making that little scene with the fish, there's always this back and forth between the simulation and the performance. So if there's something I wanted the fish to do, but I couldn't perform it with my hand because it was too complicated, I have to move my hand too fast, there's too many other things going on in the scene, I take that and put it into the simulation. But likewise, if there's something I don't like in the simulation because the motion looks too flat and unemotional, or if it's too hard to program all the nuances I want, or if the fish would have to pass the Turing test, I take that out and I perform it with my hand. So there's this back and forth, this trying to find a balance of responsibilities between what the art should do and what the artist should do. So let me give you one example of that. There was that part in the scene where we had the hook here, and the fish came up to it, and it dropped down, and we got this kind of little comedy bit going on here. And you'll notice that in this mode, the fish is turning to look at the hook. Like goes up, the fish looks up, goes down, the fish looks down. Now, normally where the fish looks is something I want to control on myself, because that's very expressive, that I can kind of have him look at things and kind of reach for things, and looking around is a very expressive motion. But in this part of the scene, things are moving so fast, and it's just taking all my concentration just to tell them where to go. And so for this particular behavior, I told the fish, okay, look at where the hook goes. And then later on, I can have him kind of look around manually wherever I want. Let me show you one of my favorite behaviors. So there was that part right at the end where the fish was here, and he's going in for the worm, and the shark appears, right? And he kind of drops down a bit, and then he's out of there. So this is a behavior called zip, where I can kind of make him go back and zip out of the scene like that. And you'll notice that when he leaves the scene, he doesn't just go straight out of it, but he kind of winds up a bit like this and then takes off. And so this is a very fundamental, very basic animation technique called anticipation, where you kind of tell the audience what's about to happen, and so they can then enjoy watching how it happens. And there's another fundamental rule of animation here, which is called squash and stretch. So you notice when he's winding back, he's kind of squashing up, and then when he's taking off, he's stretching out along the axis of motion. And these are very basic, very fundamental rules of animation. Every animator knows them, but every animator knows them in their heads. So I make this distinction between knowledge in the head versus knowledge in the hands. And I'm going to make an analogy here because I don't actually do that much animation myself, but I do play music. I improvise on the piano. And likewise, like the rules of animation, there are rules of music. There's music theory. I think it's very important to understand the theory. But when I'm playing, I'm not consciously referencing the theory, right? So I might go up to a dominant seventh and resolve down to the fifth. And I know what I'm doing, but it's not something I'm thinking about. It's something that comes out of my body. It's something that lives in my hands. And the funny thing is, I can't even say that up to the seventh and down to the fifth without kind of like doing it with my hands. That's how deeply rooted that knowledge is in my body. So that's sort of that knowledge in the hands where where you're performing according to like instincts that are coming out of your body and your emotions is something that you can have when you have a performance medium. So, for example, there were a number of points in the scene where the fish is going in for the worm, right? And he's going in, he's reaching in, and there's this delicious moment of tension here, right? Where we're like, is he gonna get it? Like maybe he's gonna get it this time. And then, oh, he doesn't get it, right? And because I'm here in the moment with you, I'm experiencing that tension the same way you as the audience are experiencing the tension. And I can hold that tension until my body tells me that it's right time to release it. And I think this is totally different than being back at your drafting table or back at your computer, like calculating we're going to spend 6 frames doing this and 3 frames doing this. It's something that comes out of listening to the emotions in your body. And I think that ultimately leads to more emotional expressiveness in the art itself. So in this part of the talk, I showed a number of different behaviors that I had for this character, where he can kind of swim around or dart around, and he can look around and reach for things and act surprised and zip out of the scene and do all these different things. In the next part of the talk, I'd like to concentrate specifically on these behaviors, and in particular, address the question of how an artist creates them. How do we teach our digital characters to behave and respond? And the standard answer to that question, going back to the time of Pac-Man, is code. We teach our digital objects to behave by writing code. Now, I believe that code is an inappropriate way of creating visual art. Code is an inappropriate way of creating visual art. And I have 2 reasons for that. The first reason, kind of the more straightforward reason, is typically when you're writing code, you can't see what you're doing. So, for example, if I asked you to draw a face, you would probably draw a head, 2 eyes, and a mouth. That is how human beings have been drawing faces since the beginning of time. But nowadays, artists are being told, no, 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 if you want to draw a face, you have to draw a head, 2 eyes, and a mouth. So we're working in this indirect, more abstract representation where we can't directly see the art that we're producing, and we can't directly manipulate the art. And visual art has always been created by direct manipulation of the art, going back to the time of cave paintings. So working in this indirect representation, to me, feels like there's something very deeply unartistic about this. I think we're missing something very, very important here, and I think we need to be very, very wary of throwing out direct manipulation. The second reason why I think code is inappropriate for creating visual art has to do with the relationship between language and visual understanding. So code is language. We code in programming languages. We think linguistically when we're coding. But the thing is, to a large extent, the entire reason that artists create visual art is they want to express something that they can't express in language. Artists draw because they want to convey something that they can't describe. The words starry night do not convey starry night. No amount of language can. Unless that language is code, because code is this kind of linguistic hack we figured out where you actually could describe that scene unambiguously. But I think it's completely the wrong way of creating that scene. That scene has to be created by somebody thinking visually. And when we're coding, we're thinking linguistically. And that's kind of a vague point right now. In a few minutes, I'm going to come back to that and clarify exactly what I mean by that. So in this next part of the talk, I'd like to show you a way of creating behaviors by direct manipulation of the art objects themselves. So I'm going to be showing you a tool, and the most important thing to get out of this is that this is not a coding tool, this is a drawing tool. It's fundamentally a drawing tool. The operations available in this tool are the same as in Illustrator or Keynote or PowerPoint. You can draw lines, draw shapes, scale and rotate things, move things around. It's fundamentally a drawing tool, and we create behaviors by performing these geometric manipulations on the art objects. So over there on the left in the sidebar, I have a few behaviors that I've created in this tool. And I'd like to quickly take you through these different behaviors to kind of give you a taste of some of the things that you can make in this tool. This first behavior that I have here is called ignore target. So the fish is the object that's behaving. It has the behavior. And then the star is another object on the canvas, which we're calling the target, which I can move around here with my finger. So I'm moving around that target object, and the fish is doing a magnificent job of completely ignoring the target. So this is kind of like the null behavior. It does nothing. This next behavior I called track target. So here, I'm moving around that star, but you can't even see it because the fish is jumping right on top of wherever the star is. So the fish is tracking the star, and this is letting me move around the fish with my finger. The next behavior, a little more interesting, is called chase target. And here, the fish is moving towards the star, but it's kind of gradually moving there. And I've got this parameter. So over here on the left, I've got this parameter in the sidebar called speed. So I can turn it down, and now the fish is slow and smooth. And then I can turn it up, and now the fish is moving really fast. So I can control the dynamics of this motion, of this behavior, using this parameter. The next behavior I have here is called spring toward target. And again, the fish is chasing the target, but it has a little bounce to him, has a little springiness to him, and kind of can throw him around like this. And again, I've got these different parameters which affect the dynamics of the motion. And then the last behavior I want to show you is called bubble, and we have a fish blowing bubbles. So these are some of the behaviors that we can create in this tool. And I'm actually going to go ahead and delete everything I just showed you, and we're going to recreate all that from scratch so I can show you how it works. So that first behavior is called track target. And over here on the right, that right-hand side of the picture is where we're defining this behavior. And there's these horizontal sections. This first section is called examples, and this is like a little playground where we can try out the behavior and see how it's working. And then the next section is labeled on each frame. And what goes here is kind of a little procedure. So on each frame, 60 times a second, whatever we tell the fish to do here is what it's going to do. And right now there's these kind of two thumbnails, these snapshots. And you can think of these as before and after shots. So if we start off the frame in this configuration with the fish there and the star there, then we're going to end up the frame like this. Now, right now they're the same because we haven't told the fish to do anything yet. What we want the fish to do for this behavior is move to the target. So we want the fish on top of the target at the end of the frame. So how are we going to tell the fish to move to the target? Well, how would you do it in Illustrator? In Illustrator, you would just pick up that object and drag it over, and it would kind of snap into place, and you get those snap lines, and you'd let it go. And so there on top of the canvas, you can see it says move self to target. Self is the name for the fish in this case. Self is the object that has the behavior. And so on each frame, no matter where the target is, we're going to move the fish to the target. And go up here to the example, and I'm moving the target around, and the fish is jumping right there. So now let's make that next behavior that I called chase target. So now, instead of the fish jumping directly to the target, we want the fish to smoothly move towards the target. And one way of doing that is to say, on each frame, instead of jumping to the target, why don't we move halfway to the target? In the next frame, we'll move half the remaining distance. On the next frame, half the remaining distance. It will kind of creep up on the target that way. So we're going to say, on each frame, we want the fish to move halfway to the target. And I can't just pick up the fish and drag him like about halfway, because that's interpreted as moving by a fixed amount. And you actually wouldn't do that in Illustrator either. If you want to move something exactly halfway in Illustrator, you would probably create a guide of some sort. And so that's basically what we're going to do here, is we're going to create a sort of guide. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use the line tool and draw a line from the fish to the target. And there's nothing magical about this line. It's just an ordinary line on an ordinary drawing canvas, just like in Illustrator. But that's step one. Step one is we draw the line from self to the target. Step two is we use the scale tool to scale back that line. So I'll scale to about 50%. So we drew a line, scaled it. Step three is move the fish to the end of the line, right? So we started out here, and then we drew a line, scaled it, and moved the fish to the end of that line. That's one frame. On the next frame, we're going to start here, draw line, scale it, move the fish to the end of the line. On the next frame, draw the line, scale it, move the fish, and you can see on each frame we're just kind of moving in towards the target. And I can go up here to my examples and try it out, and sure enough, my fish is moving towards the target, but it's actually kind of hard to see now because the fish is moving really fast. Because he's going halfway 60 times a second. 60 times a second is really fast, and it's kind of hard to see his movement. So why don't we go back here to the procedure and say, change the scale there to about 10%. Say on each frame he'll just go 10% of the way to the target. And now I put down the target, and you can see he has this nice, smooth motion. And it's actually getting a little bit annoying to keep going back and forth between the method and the example. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my example and hold down the record button and record a path for the target to follow. And I'm actually going to clone off that example a couple times and record a few other paths, and maybe one like that. So we've got those fish swimming up there, and now when I change the behavior, like I change the scale factor, I can just kind of glance up at the top of the screen and see how it's responding differently. So I notice that when I make the scale factor really big, the fish has a fast, crude motion. He's tracking my finger exactly. When I scale it really small, now the fish has this slow, smooth motion. And I can just see that by glancing up at the top examples. So this scale factor here seems to really affect the dynamics of the motion. And so it seems like something that we'd want to be able to control. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my finger down where it says scale line by 38%. I'm just going to put my finger on that 38% and drag it off and drag it over here to the sidebar and drop it in. And now it's this parameter that I can control, and I can change that scale factor and change the dynamics of that behavior. And why don't I give it a better name? I'll call it speed, and then kind of come up here to my my example, my playground, and now I can try out my slow fish or try out my fast fish, or I can change the speed while I'm moving the fish. So if I want to kind of ease in behavior where it starts out slow and then speeds up, I can put the speed low, move the target, and then crank up the speed as he's moving. So this becomes a performance control. I'm using my left hand to say how to move. I'm using my right hand to say where to move. And when you have this kind of performance control, then an artist can become fluent, where you can get that kind of expressiveness with your hands in order to get really expressive behavior of the character. So for this behavior, we have this kind of three-step procedure where we draw this line, and then we scale it, and then we move the fish. And you could implement the same procedure in code. And some of you probably have implemented exactly this many, many times. Perhaps even the same three steps where you take a vector from one object to the other, you multiply the vector by a scale factor, and then you add the vector to the object's position. So same procedure, but the difference is here, this procedure is expressed as a geometric construction. Here, we've expressed the procedure geometrically. When we're writing in code, we're expressing the procedure algebraically. So geometry and algebra are these two different ways we have of modeling the world, these two different ways we have of understanding mathematics. And throughout the history of mathematics, one or the other has kind of been in fashion, and it's flopped back and forth. But David Hestins points out that the reason that we have these two different ways of understanding mathematics, algebra and geometry, is that they correspond to two different facilities in the human mind. Algebra runs on our language facilities. geometry runs on our visual perception facilities, our spatial perception. These are both very powerful facilities. We use both of them all the time for all sorts of things. But I think that if we're trying to find a mathematical framework for visual artists to create visual art, which is what this is, I think it needs to be grounded in the visual mathematics, which is geometry, not algebra. So that's the more precise reason why I think code is an inappropriate way of creating visual art. Code is algebraic. We think linguistically when we're coding. Great art has always been created by thinking visually, and so I think we need a more geometric approach. So this is a nice enough behavior, but there are certain types of motion that we can't get out of this. So if you remember that earlier scene with the fish, when the fish got excited, he had like a little bit of bounce to him, a little springiness. He would kind of overshoot the target and come back. And this behavior can't overshoot because it's always moving straight towards the target. And so let's make another behavior that does have that kind of springiness to it. And so I'm going to call this spring toward target. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. You don't have to follow exactly all the details. I mostly just want to show that it can be done and it's not at all difficult to do. So for this behavior, the fish has momentum. Instead of moving towards the target, it's moving in whatever direction it's moving with some velocity, and then that velocity kind of steers in towards the target. So in order to model that velocity, we're just going to use a line. So I'm just drawing a line on the canvas, just an ordinary line, and I'm going to call it velocity. And we're going to say on each frame, we're going to move the fish to the end of that line. And then we're going to move the line to the end of the fish. So our frame is we move the fish and move the line. On the next frame, we move the fish and move the line. On the next frame, we move the fish and move the line. And he kind of chugs along there like that. And you can see up in the example that the fish is just kind of taking off out of the scene and eventually gets so far away that the system says, oh, he's probably not coming back, and resets the scene. So we've got the fish moving with some constant velocity, and now we want to model friction or damping. We want the fish to kind of slow down and come to a stop. And that's easy enough to do geometrically. All I have to do is take that velocity line and scale it using the scale tool by a little bit. And now you can see that the fish takes off, but he kind of slows down and comes to a stop. So we've got velocity, we've got damping. Now the last thing that we need is we need to steer that velocity in towards the target. So if you remember in the previous behavior, the chase target, we did that by, we drew a line from the fish to the target. Then we scaled that line, saying how much we want to be pulled in towards the target. And then we moved the fish by that amount. We're going to do almost exactly that here, but instead of moving the fish by that amount, we're going to move the endpoint of the velocity by that amount. So we draw a line, we scale it, and then I'm going to plop that amount over on the end of the velocity, and then move the endpoint of the velocity to the endpoint of that line. And now we've got the springy fish. And there are two kind of arbitrary scale factors I had in there. One was this one, the damping, and I'm going to call that over as a parameter called slide, because when it's high, the fish is very slippery. And here's this one saying how much we're being pulled in towards the target, and I'm going to call that pull. And then we can go over here, and once again, we can play with these parameters as we're moving the target and get very expressive and very different forms of motion. So what we have here is an implementation of a spring model. And it works the same way as the spring model in any physics code library. The difference is that here it's expressed as a geometric construction, which means that we can look through this definition and understand what it's doing because all of the variables, the velocities and positions, are represented with geometric objects, with lines and objects. And we were able to create this procedure by directly manipulating art objects on the canvas. So now I also want to make a simple particle system. So create a new behavior here and called bubble, and we're going to make a fish blowing bubbles. So what we want to happen is, like, every second or so, the fish will create a circle in front of its face, and that circle will kind of rise up. And this is a little different because we don't want them to blow a bubble on each frame. We want them to blow a bubble every 60 frames or so, every second or so. So how are we going to do that? How are we going to wait for 60 frames? If we're writing this in code, then what you probably would do is you'd have your function that's called 60 times a second, and you'd probably have a counter, and then every time that function is called, you'd increment that counter, and when it gets to 60, you know that a second has passed, and you blow a bubble, and you reset the counter. We're going to do something sort of like that, but it's going to be more inspired by geometry. So if you think about how periodic events are represented in nature, there's often circles involved. So you have the Earth going around the sun, or the Earth spinning on its axis. These natural events are timed using rotations. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to draw a line on the canvas. Again, just an ordinary line. I'm going to give it the name clock. And I'm going to say on each frame, we're going to rotate that line by a little bit. And then on each frame, it'll rotate and line and rotate and rotate and rotate. And you go up here and you see we have this line spinning around. Now I'm going to draw a circle on the canvas, kind of over here. And now we can say, maybe every time that line smacks into that circle, that'll be our chance to blow a bubble. So how are we going to detect that? How are we going to tell when the line intersects the circle? Well, we're going to use another method. So these procedures here are called methods for historical reasons. And all the behaviors I've shown you so far have only had a single method called on each frame. But a behavior can have multiple methods. You can have a method that's called when the behavior is first applied to an object, or a method that runs when the behavior is removed from the object, or when two objects intersect, different types of conditions. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to add a new method here. And this method is called when clock intersects circle. So when that line intersects the circle. When that line intersects the circle, whatever we say to happen here is what will happen. So for example, I can say, like, move the fish forward a little bit. And now every time it comes around, the fish is moving forward a little bit. But I don't want to move the fish forward a little bit. I want to draw a bubble. So I'm going to draw a line from the fish to kind of in front of its face somewhere. And I'm going to draw a little circle there, which is going to be my bubble. And now the last thing that we need to do is we want that bubble to rise up. And at this point, the bubble is kind of becoming a character of its own. It's taking on a life of its own. And so we're going to make the bubble rise up by giving it a behavior. So here we're defining a behavior of the fish that tells it how to blow bubbles. We now need to define a behavior for the bubble that tells it how to rise up. So one more behavior here, which I will call rise. And we're going to say on each frame, we're going to move up a little bit. And you'll notice that what you're seeing here is a fish rising up. And I'm leaving it that way on purpose to emphasize that in all of these examples, the fish is kind of just a placeholder. It represents self. It's whatever object that has given the behavior. And so if you told an elephant to rise up, if you gave the elephant the rise behavior, the elephant would rise up. If you told a bubble to rise up, it would rise up. In this case, the fish is just kind of a stand-in for whatever the behaving object is. So we have it rising up, and we can also kind of scale it down a little bit, because that might look interesting. So scale down a little bit, and like so. And go back to this bubble behavior. So when clock intersects circle, we draw the line, we draw the bubble, and then the very last step is to apply the rise behavior to that bubble. And then over here, we have a fish blowing bubbles. And he's not blowing them that quickly, so why don't I go back here to where I have this rotation, this clock. I'm going to pull off that rotation rate, drop it over here as a parameter, which I'm going to call rate. And now I can kind of crank that up and make lots of bubbles. And maybe I say, you know, I actually don't like the bubbles shrinking as they go up. Maybe maybe they should grow. So I can go back here to the rise of behavior and change that scale factor to make it a little bit bigger. And now go over here to my bubbles, and now I have growing bubbles. So this is an example of making a particle system in this tool. So what I've tried to show you here is a way of creating behaviors by direct manipulation of the art itself, rather than indirectly through writing code. And using geometric constructions, things like guidelines and rotations and intersections, to calculate where things should go and what should happen. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that this is the right way of creating behaviors, and in 10 years from now we're all going to be making geometric constructions to tell our art what to do. This is just a research idea right now. The reason I'm showing you this is I want to break the association between behavior and code. I want to break the assumption that creating behavior equals writing code. So when I say our art needs to behave, you don't hear that as artists need to code. Artists don't need to code. We need to invent ways of creating behavior that makes sense in the context of visual art. That said, I think the geometric approach is promising. I drew a few lines on canvas and I got a spring system. I drew a few other lines and I got a particle system. I think that implies that there's a power and flexibility here, which I find encouraging. There's one more part to this talk, but before I show that to you, I want to summarize what I've talked about so far. So we have this new art medium. It's really good at emulating other media, and I think that's distracted us from its primary strength, which is simulation. Objects created in this medium can behave and respond, and I think they have to behave and respond in order for it to be native art. Everything we draw should be alive by default. And when the art is alive, there can be a collaboration between the art and the artist, with the art behaving through simulation, the artist behaving through performance, and the two of them working together, responding to each other. So art needs to behave, but I don't think that means that artists need to code. I think that there are ways, such as a geometric approach, where artists can create art, can create behaviors by direct manipulation of the art objects themselves, the way art has always been created since the time of cave paintings. The main thing I want you to get out of this talk is dissatisfaction. I want you to go home and open up Photoshop and feel like you're drawing dead fish. I want you to feel it. I want you to feel how everything you draw is so flat and static and lifeless. When you're creating animation, I want you to feel how cold and dead it is, how you can't play with it. It won't work with you. I want you to feel everything that we're missing by using this medium to emulate older media. And ultimately, I want you to have higher standards for this medium. I'd like to wrap up this talk by performing a little piece for you. You might call this a live animation. I kind of think of it as a digital puppet show. So I'm going to play some music, a piece that was composed by Kyle Gabler, and I've got some pictures that I drew, and I've given these pictures behaviors, like we've been talking about. But there's no pre-recorded animation here. There's no timeline. My pictures don't know when to come on or what to do. They just know how to listen to my hand, and I'm going to try to guide them. This piece is meaningful for me because I don't think I could have created this in any other way.
Ignition sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Houston, we're copying.
There seems to be no difficulty in moving around, perhaps easier than the simulations of 160.
It appears to be very cohesive material of the same sort. I'll try to get a rock in here.
Oh, that looks beautiful from radio.
Thank you.